Mush Farmer. Hey, welcome back to another episode. Right now, we're going to talk about what mushroom choices you have. Since I'm primarily doing king oysters right now, we're just going to go ahead and start with those. Now, if you remember about 4 or 5 days ago, last video, I showed you these same logs, and they just had small mushrooms starting out. But you can see in just a matter of time, they've gotten pretty sizable. A nice big tight cluster right there. And if you've ever seen these in the store, in the grocery, they're actually called king trumpets. It's the same strain of mushroom as the king oyster. Same exact mushroom. But you'll notice that they grow the caps small and the stems fat. Now the reason for that is that the stems and the caps are equally as tender and palatable on the king oysters, which is nice because it makes them a better sale because you can sell the entire mushroom as a usable product. But you won't find king oysters with caps like these at the grocery, I guarantee. If you do, they're probably done by a local grower. Now, let's take a look at these about 4 days later when I'm ready to harvest them and pack them up for the restaurants. Alright, it's 4 days later. And you can see these king oysters have gotten quite larger. Caps are nice and broad. They're really at the peak of their maturity. If you let them go any longer, they're going to start making a spory mess. But they'll still be good. It just doesn't look really good when it has a lot of white spores around it. You see here I have my boxes. I'm going to pick them and put them in there. Got a bag and scissors for taking off any clumps of straw that come off with it. And some people would just cut the mushrooms right off the log. I always just take them and just pull them out. You see right here there's a little bit of straw still attached. But as long as there's not loose straw, you're fine. Or you know, a big hunk of straw that's unusable. But I just rip them out, and then any like aborts, which are all these little guys that don't really go anywhere, that aren't really worth much of anything, they get tossed out as well, and the log gets cleaned up, and it'll be ready for a second flush. Now I get about $8 a pound for these at the restaurants. And everybody loves them. Here are some king oysters in a vertical type of setup. It's not the setup I use again because the ceilings in my basement are too low. But if you have a high ceiling in your basement, you can get away with it. Now here is the same log several days later, and you can see it's ready to pick, and it is just full of king oyster mushrooms. Now one of the fun things about growing these king oysters is that they can get monstrously huge. You can see this one in front of me. It actually weighs 1 pound and 3/4. That is insane for one mushroom. Also you can see that it has a kind of a cup shape to it, and I would mist it until the water would pool up in the center of it, and it would drink probably about a half a cup of water just out of the top every day. Here is a 3-pound box of king oyster mushrooms. As you can see, they are a variety of sizes, and I think that's really good because it gives you a little choice if you want to use large mushrooms to cut into steaks or small mushrooms for sautés and whatnot. These are the blue oyster mushrooms. They are part of the Pleurotus austriatus complex, which includes other mushrooms such as the tree oyster, the pearl oyster, all different types, so there's a lot of variety within it. But these blue oysters right here, they have a nice slate blue color to them, and that color even gets deeper and darker the colder the temperature gets. Unlike the king oyster mushrooms, where the caps and the stems are both equally edible, the blue oyster mushrooms and the mushrooms like it, you can only really eat the cap portion of it. The stems are too tough and chewy, But they don't go to waste. A lot of my chefs will take the stems and boil them down into mushroom soup stock, and it tastes really good, and it helps add a little more kick of that mushroom flavor. One of the issues that blue oysters and the mushrooms like it have is that if you let too many mushrooms form around the log, it'll tend to reduce the yields and you won't get as nice looking mushrooms. Now this is all based upon how much nutrition you have in the log. When we get into doing alfalfa supplemented logs, you can support a lot more mushrooms. A competitive price for the blue oyster mushrooms is about $6 a pound, although you want to raise that price probably about $8 a pound at farmers markets, because I've found that most people want the caps already cut away from the stems, which you're going to lose about a quarter of the weight. As you can see here, you can get a variety of sizes when they grow in the logs. Some clusters are 3 pounds or more, which only really restaurants are going to purchase that. And there's a lot of medium and small clusters as well. Elm oyster mushrooms are another mushroom that look like the blue oysters, but in reality they're a different species called Hypsizygus ulmaris. But if you look at them, they should really be in the same group as Pleurotus. The only really differences is that the caps are a lighter and kind of cream color, and they do get a bit larger. If you don't let the caps get larger, you will actually lose yields with this. You can see here just how large the caps on the elm oysters get. Another nice thing about the elm oysters is that you don't have to worry about how many pins form around the log. There's no issue about the log making too many pins for it to support, which is very nice because you just let it go and it produces really nice clusters that aren't really too large and pretty much all small enough that you could sell at a market. Now let's talk about a couple varieties of the oyster mushrooms that I do not grow for certain reasons we'll get into. But you can grow them, and they're great for the markets because they have bright colors and some excellent eye appeal. These are the gold oyster mushrooms. The technical name is Pleurotus centrinopiliatus, which separates them from the other Pleurotus austriatus mushrooms like the blue oysters. The reasons I do not grow these is because they don't have a great refrigeration shelf life, and usually the caps are very delicate and brittle. Also, when they get dry, instead of the cap margins just getting a little bit darker brown, they turn a jet black, which kind of looks unusual to somebody that doesn't really know what's going on. But otherwise, they do cook up well. They have like a nutty kind of flavor, people could say. And again, they are nice, bright golden color that is sure to grab people's attention. Another nice thing about the gold oyster mushroom is that it grows fast and it's extremely hardy. You can see in this picture there was a log made with cottonseed hulls, which is another substrate you can use besides straw, but the person that made it, not me, didn't put holes in the log, and overnight it spoiled. But taking it outside, it got kicked around, holes ripped in it, and you can see mushrooms are actually growing out of the log, while the rest of it looks moldy and green. So they are very strong. The pink oyster mushroom, also known as Pleurotus dejamour, is another mushroom that I don't grow, but it's nice for the markets. As you can see, it's a nice pink color, and the color can go from a whitish pink all the way to almost fluorescent. It really depends on the condition it's grown in. It likes warm weather. These next photos of the pink oyster mushrooms were provided to me by Lipa of shroomery.org. You can see right here a small cluster of them growing out of a log. Now, one major issue the pink oysters have is that they have to be grown where the temperature is over 70 degrees constantly. If you don't, and the temperature drops, the mushrooms will get pale in color, they'll be overly wet, and they really just won't be marketable. There are a few reasons why I don't grow the pink oyster mushroom. One being that they don't really have a long shelf life in the refrigerator. It's only about 4 to 5 days. Another is that they're not so great for the restaurants that want to use them in gourmet dishes because their texture is a bit tougher than the other mushrooms. And although they have a brilliant pink color, the color does get lost when you cook it. Now, don't get me wrong, they are excellent for groceries and farmers markets where the person buying the mushroom gets to see their brilliant pink color. Now be careful, because if you let your pink oyster mushrooms over mature, you will lose that beautiful pink color. Another mushroom we can grow in the same environment as our oyster mushrooms is the lion's mane mushroom, known as Hericium arenaceus. You can see here that it's a nice brilliant bright white, and it actually grows these little teeth structures down below it, which is where the spores come out. Now the lion's mane mushroom doesn't really grow on straw too well. You get some limited success, but not enough to make a profit from doing it. So what you have to do instead is grow them off sterilized bags of sawdust, wood chips, and wheat bran, or as you see here, sterilized bags of shredded paper and wheat bran. So it's a bit of some green recycling going on there with reusing some shredded newspaper. But you can see they produce really well. You can usually get about $10 to $12 a pound for lion's mane. Not a lot of chefs I've found actually are familiar with it. It's kind of something you have to introduce to them, maybe even show them some recipes to get them to try to taste the flavor of it, which is kind of a mild lobster taste to it, which is really unique. But they are an excellent mushroom, and they would sell well at restaurants, groceries, and markets. All of these mushrooms I just showed you can be grown in a 80% relative humidity environment with the temperature somewhere between 50 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and you'll still get good results. Now there's all kinds of different other types of mushrooms we'll probably get down into in the future that I don't really grow at the moment because they require a special high humidity environment that would damage our basement. And you really can only have the humidity as high as 80% or you'll start getting mold on the rafters and such, and that is not a good idea. Also, all these other mushrooms will be grown on usually a combination of sterilized sawdust, wood chips, and wheat bran. Well, there's several different types of recipes. But again, we'll get into that in another episode. Well, I hope you've been enjoying this series so far. Please support my efforts and hit that like button. And please also post any comments with your questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. Alright, see you next time on Mushroom Adventures.